Hello, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. We'll start on our recap. So we'll talk about a mock-up we've been working on as of last week. We're going to continue working on that this week. So you can go ahead. I'm pretty sure I've uploaded it to the FWD repository. So if you're not familiar with it, you go to github.com/jeffreyw/FWD. This is accessible from the class page, kind of in a weird, obscure way. If you scroll down here and just get the class materials, that's step 4 in the get set up thing, you can click on this button, or you can clone the repository, which would be my recommended way of doing things. Learning Git is an important thing for all developers. So if you have the FWD repository, you can go into Series 9, Class 18. If you don't, you can clone or download it. If you don't know what cloning is, you can just download a zip file of the entire repository. Series 9, Class 18. This is where we're supposed to be looking. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to that locally. FWD, Series 9, Class 18. As usual, well, I'll talk about creating. So let's go ahead and see what we worked on last week. So in this folder, we have a bunch of new stuff that's actually specifically for the assignment. But existing stuff is this layout.ejs and index.ejs file in the style.scss file. Those might be unfamiliar extensions if you're only familiar with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. What we're using in this folder is Harp. Harp is one of many different local servers that you can run that has the added bonus of being able to compile certain files into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Anywhere you see EJS is going to become an HTML file. EJS stands for Embedded JavaScript. Don't let that fool you. It doesn't actually have anything to do with generating JavaScript files. It's just that we're using the language JavaScript to generate HTML files. So that's why there's a little confusion there. This is in contrast to JavaScript we run in our browser, which goes ahead and does additional interaction and programmatic behavior in your browser. This is JavaScript that runs before anything reaches your browser. What reaches your browser is just plain HTML. And then same with that style SCSS. SCSS, which stands for Sassy CSS, is CSS with additional rules, all of which are processed out into regular CSS by the time they reach the browser. So we're going to go ahead and open this directory both using our text editor and by running a Harp server. So first thing, just open up your text editor of choice and go ahead and open. Again, that is, if you've downloaded it, it's FWD, or if you've been working on it last week, Series 9, Class 18, there it is, and then just go ahead and open this, and there's all our stuff. Again, this is a lot more complicated than it looked last week because I've got the assignment in the same folder, so there's a little bit of a mix-up there, but oh well. So the important stuff is index.ejs, style.scss. That's pretty much it. That's the stuff we have to worry about. I guess also layout.ejs. I'll talk about the difference between these two files when we load up the server, which we can do by opening up a terminal. On macOS, it would just be called terminal. I use a different thing called iTerm2 for stupid reasons. Series 9, Class 18. And we go ahead and do Harp server, assuming you've installed Harp. If you haven't, I have instructions, as usual, on this little side presentation. To install Harp, you go ahead and download Node.js and install it, and then you go ahead and install Harp using npm install-gharp. So if you run Harp server, then you'll see that your terminal is now just printing this out, that a server is running. You can go to it, localhost 9000, for example, and this is what we'll load up. So this is where we left the site last week. Our goal, possibly by the end of this week, by the end of this class, we'll see how fast we can go, or if it's a good idea to go fast. It's available on a different repository called noiseco. jeffreyw/noiseco. In this root directory, I have a few files called mockup. Today we're going to look at mockup annotations, and this is what it's going to look like with a bunch of red text on top of it. Those are, of course, just annotations meant to show you measurements, colors, other sorts of specifics that you might want when you write your CSS. So this is how far we've gotten. We pretty much finished with the header and the nav, and we're going to go on to the different sections, the hero section and the details section today. All other work is almost done. We need to do a little bit of styling on the footer, whatever else. The one thing we might not get to, depending on how far we go this week, is making it responsive. And if that does happen, then I will continue this on the next week. A few announcements about the class while I'm at this is that I have decided to do a new series of classes starting on July 11th. So that will be the 10th series of front-end web development. That's 5 years on July 11th. Yeah, there's that. So tell your friends, tell your enemies. That's when it's going on. I'll be making announcements. I really should have been making announcements. I've just been forgetting to. But yeah, as for the rest of this class, we have a few more. We've got this week, possibly next week. Let me see. I'm going to check my calendar specifically. This is the last series of classes. We did working for professional mockups, working for professional mockups continued, and then we just had one more class after that. Given that it's the 6th today, and I'm starting on the 11th, that gives us the 13th to possibly do a third week of this if necessary, the 20th to do a, I'm sorry, the 20th I'm not going to be there. So the 20th is going to be a week off. And the 27th to do the back-end class, or an additional optional class if I have time for it. And then there's the 4th, which obviously July 4th, we're not doing class then. And then there's July 11th when I start my new stuff. So we might not, I might not have time to do the bonus class that's not even listed here, which is a little thing on HTML, just talking about all the different elements all in one fell swoop. But I'll go ahead and link that out and show you it. And, show you. It's basically just a single page that uses every single HTML element in a single file the correct quote-unquote way. So that'll be funny if we can get to it, but again, it's not essential. Depends on how long this class takes, essentially. So there we go. That's it. So back to NoiseCo. Any questions at this point? Any thoughts? Things you want to share or ask me?
How are you able to click the link in iTerm to link to?
You hold down Command. In iTerm, if you want to navigate to a URL that starts with HTTP, hold down Command and then click it. So that's cool. Yeah. Right. I don't know. We'll take a look at what we did here so far. It's rather straightforward. So I'm going to have this sitting on the right here because might as well take up, since this page is rather narrow, we might as well have the dev tools take up the right. I can close the console entirely, which will give us more space to work with. So let's see. What we made last week, we had the header, nav, section class hero, section class details, and footer. That's pretty much going to be our entire site. We decided that inside every one of these main elements inside the body, there will be a container div. This container div applies padding on the left and the right, which kind of spaces the content away from the very edges of the window. You might ask, why don't we just apply that padding to each thing, like header, nav, section, footer? Or why don't we just apply a class to each one of those called container, and why do we make an entirely separate element? The reasoning is not clear just yet. Once we get to creating the web version of this, we'll see why we want to have a container that is separate from the rest of the nav. It has to do with the background stretching all the way across, but the content not stretching all the way across. So once we actually run into that situation, that's when these container divs start to become a little more useful, reasonable. Anyway, inside here, the header, we've got H1 and we've got a UL. This UL inside the header has a display of flex, which means that the list items inside it are going to be horizontally stacked rather than vertically stacked from left to right. We've got 3 list items: welcome Jeffrey, link my account, and a link logout. There's a little separator, a little border between these two. Between these 3, that is. Welcome Jeffrey, my account, logout, the little border is there. That border is actually just a right border, a literal right border of 1 pixel solid dark bluish color that separates these things. The final list item does not have a right border because we have a rule that says header li last child border right 0. So that means we're undoing a rule that we set right beforehand. That is so we don't have a little line sitting here out on the right, which doesn't really make much sense. The whole last child thing has sort of an added bonus of us not having to worry about how many elements there are inside a specific thing. Just as long as it's the last one, then it doesn't have a border. So we don't need to count, we just say last. So that's a little helpful pseudo class selector in CSS. What else here? We're using just plain old margin to space the UL away from the H1 a little bit. Oh yeah, this H1 is using a trick called image replacement, where there is text inside here, as you can see on the right. It says noiseco right inside here. But what's showing up inside of, instead of actual literal selectable text, noiseco is a logo that has the words noiseco inside it. As you can see, as I hover over this little images thing, you'll see that noiseco with the Noisebridge logo is part of that logo image. So where did the text go? It was pushed off to the side of this div using a combination of text indent, white space, and overflow. These three rules basically hide text inside something, inside a box, but the box itself can still be sized however you want. So we're specifically sizing it to be exactly 171 by 50, which is the same size as the image, which means that the background image just shows up right there in the middle of it, as if it's simply just an image on the page. Why not just use an image tag? The reason for that is that this doesn't really have the role of being an image on the page. Roles are important. Think of semantic roles of certain elements and why they're on the page. Again, I like to use images when the content is referring to some sort of image for illustrative use, for illustrative purposes, like being a photograph of something that the text is talking about, a drawing, a diagram, any sort of graphical representation of something that adds to the content of the page. If it doesn't really fall into that category, it's probably more of a decoration, and you might consider decorating the page with CSS, decorating whatever you want with CSS instead, which means that it doesn't add additional semantics to the page. It just makes the page look nicer. Which means, you know, if we weren't loading CSS here, like if I were to get rid of this link tag, bam, we just see the words noise code again, like regularly, right? So there you go. That's one easy way to disable CSS on a page, by the way. Just get rid of all the link elements just by deleting them. Anyway, I reloaded the page and the link tag is back. So let's see, what else is there? Nav is a UL with LIs inside it. Not very exciting, other than the fact that we made each A a block element, which means that we can now give it line height and we can center the text inside it. If it were not block, well, there would be problems. All of a sudden, this A, as you can see, doesn't stretch as tall or as wide as it did before. It's only surrounding the home. But if we give it a display of block, then its line height, which is 36, stretches the A to that height. And because it's block, it stretches as far across as it can. Of course, inside the container, which pads it in a little bit. So why do we give it a line height of 36? It's so the single line of text that's inside it sort of centers itself into the middle. There are other ways we can achieve this using like flexbox with flex direction of column or other sorts of crazy stuff. But if we want just a single element and we want to position the text both horizontally and vertically in the center of it, as long as it's a single line of text, all we do is just specify a line height and set text align to center, and it's going to be right there in the exact center of the box. So that is to say, if I were to increase the line height, the text would still be in the center of the box. Cool. Let's see. That's pretty much all we did. We gave these things backgrounds just to differentiate them. This details div has a background of beige, and this does not. So we started, you know, something I should mention about this page, which makes it a little unconventional, but I'm doing it essentially to save time, is that I didn't add a specific class to almost every element on this page. If I were to do this a little bit more professionally, or if I was to expect that this design would have to be a little bit more modularized, where I would decide where certain things go and whatever, I would use fewer element selectors, like I'm doing with nav, comma, footer, or things like header H1, and I would more give this H1 a class of like main header or header heading or something silly like that. So I don't need to keep it at H1 at all times. I don't need to keep it inside the header necessarily even. The ordering doesn't matter. The descendant, whether the H1 is inside the header, that doesn't matter at all. So I'll start to use classes a little bit more as I start to style this thing a little bit more. You'll see what I mean by that as I start to select elements by class name rather than their actual element name. Oh no, that sounded really loud. Anyway, that's about it. That's where we're at. And we're going to start in about 15 minutes. So you guys just came in. I thought I'd give you a little catch up here. If you haven't done it already, this is week 2 of working on a little mock-up that I already put together. Essentially, I've quote unquote given this to you guys, and it is your task, quote unquote your, but more like my because I'm doing a lecture, to turn this from mock-up into HTML. So if you want to get the stuff that we already worked on last week, you can download it from jeffrey.w/fwd. This GitHub repository is where you can download the last class materials for the last 2 series, or this series and the last one. And the specific stuff is inside Series 9, Class 18, and there's that. Again, I mentioned that you're going to have to install harp, which is a little local server that allows you to pre-process certain things like HTML template files into HTML, CSS, sassy CSS into regular CSS. So the directions to install harp are right here. While this is on screen, I might as well talk again about EJS and SCSS. So as you can see here, this index.ejs is not a full HTML file. It starts with a section tag, and it just has 2 section tags in it, and that's it. So where is our doc type tag? Where is our HTML tag? Where's head, body, etc.? They're in the layout file. The layout file is doc type, HTML, head, body, etc. Here's our header, and here's our nav. And then here's a really weird looking thing that doesn't look like HTML, because it's not HTML, it's EJS. These little EJS delimiters contain a keyword called yield, which essentially tells the EJS templating engine to go ahead and paste in, essentially, whatever contents of the page we are on. Whatever the content, sorry, I can't complete that sentence, but essentially it's basically just taking, if you're loading up index, it's going to take the contents of index.ejs and throw them right inside here in between the top nav and the bottom footer, and now you've got a full HTML page. This is helpful because that means that if you make multiple pages on this site, like an about page or whatever else, you can use the same layout, don't have to change it at all, but the contents between the header and the footer, or the nav and the footer, that's what changes. So that's very helpful because when I started making HTML, I started thinking about, okay, well, I've got, this page has this website has multiple pages. I'm going to have to put the header and the footer on every single one of those pages. Oh no, it turns out that I have to change the header in some way, add a new link, change the copyright at the bottom of the page, change the name of the site, do something like that. Now I'm going to have to do it n number of times, where n is the number of pages I have on the site, which is really awful. So using a layout file like this means I only have to make that change once. So highly recommend it. And a little server like harp makes it pretty much brain dead to just create a file called _layout.ejs and then make a whole bunch of other EJS files, and it'll just mash them together for you with 0 configuration necessary. So yeah, that's a helpful little thing. Yeah, so that's where we're at. Any questions? Any things they want me to cover, or curiosities or whatever? I should say, if you guys are new, that please stop me at any time with any questions you have. Do understand that you are coming in at like week 2 of a series of different things, putting something together. But please, any questions you have will probably help others, because I'm sure not everyone retains the same information, and people need stuff repeated to them all the time, so I completely understand that. So yeah.
Given that there are some packages out there, notable example of WordPress.
Yeah.
The content management system.
Yes.
And putting new content into there involves going through the administrative interface and you type things into a cookie box.
Yes.
Are there counterpart things that essentially have these as at least some of the output? Content management.
Well, so your question is about WordPress and whether
WordPress is just one of the many
yes.
content management engines, and so are there others where interacting with them is sort of a maybe two-way street between some of these principles?
So you're saying if there's something that's kind of like halfway between not entirely writing all your code, but like being able to use some sort of administrative interface, some sort of GUI that helps you out a little bit.
Well, that's one way to take the question.
Yeah. Well, okay. So first thing to talk about WordPress is that WordPress has some similarities with what we're doing here. The biggest difference is that it's database backed. So WordPress is a PHP-based content management system. And what it really does is it takes PHP files, layout files that look very similar to this, but have different delimiters here. It actually looks a little bit more like, you know, whatever. Something like that. You know, that's what a PHP delimiter looks like. But it's kind of the same idea, where you just have a whole bunch of different files that where it's mostly HTML with a little bit of delimited PHP executable code inside it. And you know what it comes together to do is build out your site. And the difference with WordPress is that before all that stuff can be built out, your WordPress core needs to go ahead and query your current post from the database so it can populate that data and insert it into your template in the right way. Other than that, it's kind of the same concept. It's just like one extra piece. And because it has that extra database piece, it needs to be more than just a static site, which Harp will eventually generate. It can't just be static files. It needs to be PHP running on the server. Whereas with this sort of thing, it can just be plain old HTML once it reaches the server because it will never have to change unless you want to re-upload something with new content. So, you know, it's really just sort of a separation of concerns about what's responsible for putting what together. To expand upon your question about other sorts of things that do that, closer or maybe even further to the you know, to the WordPress spectrum, there's things like Drupal or Joomla, other PHP-based content management systems, which aren't just about blogging, but they're more about like, you know, setting up a big, you know, sort of series of nested views and sites and things with a lot of users to collaborate and stuff. But further away from WordPress and closer to what we're working on here would be things like Rails. Rails or Django. Both Rails and Django require a lot more knowledge about back-end programming because not only do they have you managing your own database, but they also have you writing a lot of your action controller routing code, determining what routes, which paths of your server, of your site go to which routes and which code is executed. But at the end of the day, you know, Rails and Django and other sorts of things like it can end up executing files very much like this, very, very much, in fact. The difference between an EJS file and an ERB file, embedded Ruby, which is what Rails can use, is this. There's an equal sign instead of a dash. So, you know, it will use a view layer very similar to this one. Rails has a bunch of third-party libraries that allow you to administrate your database models, but you can set it up however you want. So you can set up your database, and then you can set up this, the two of them are called Rails Admin and Active Admin, two third-party gems that you can sort of install into Rails very easily that allow you to administrate your database in more of a graphical way. List out certain items, whatever you have, blog posts, users, however you want it. And Django comes with a built-in one of those, a built-in administrative interface for new projects. So you can just go ahead and enable admin and then log in and go ahead and do that. So that's where there's kind of a halfway point between there. It certainly requires a lot more work, maintenance on your own part, but I would probably call that like halfway, between having something a little bit more managed like WordPress and having something completely DIY where you're writing like all the code like a static site like this. So yeah, I think that explains it. Okay. Cool. Any other questions, things they need to know before we start? We got 5 minutes before we start our new material. Well, okay. Take a drink of water. Another reminder, most people already heard this, but this is either the penultimate or antepenultimate class. I love that word. So we either have one more class, no, I'm sorry, or anti-penultimate. We either have one more week. Sorry, okay, let me say this. If this is the last class of this series where we're putting together this mock-up and not doing a third week of it, then next week we will be talking about back-end web development and how it relates to front-end. I'll give a little quick rundown of Express on Node.js, a little bit of Ruby on Rails, like I just talked about, and a very small amount of PHP, just to explain what it is and why you shouldn't use it. And then after that, we will, if we have time, if I have enough weeks, that is, I will talk about HTML kind of in a glossary kind of way, showing you all the different things in one usage. If not, then it'll just be back end, and then we'll. If not, then next week we'll continue this. The week after we'll talk about back end, and then we'll break until July 11th, in which I start over, going all the way to the basics, talking about JavaScript for a number of weeks, then CSS for a number of weeks. So July 11th, tell your friends, that's when I start fresh, all new material. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I want you to be able to follow along. So yeah, again, it's. I would go ahead and just download the whole repository, of course, like not just the files. You probably want to be able to, yeah. Since everyone's pretty much here, I'll just say, as we work on these files together, or as you work on your own version of the stuff I'm working on up here, please go ahead and don't do your work inside the thing you just downloaded, unless you downloaded the zip file, in which case go hog wild, make as many changes as you want. If you have cloned my Git repository, don't make changes inside that repository, because you'll have to sort of parse out the changes you've made into your own thing if you want to download it, if you want to download next week's materials, right? So again, please do your work in a separate folder of your own creation outside of my folder that you might have downloaded. It'll help you out. It'll help you keep organized, etc. So there's that.
Values, so depending on the value, was like current and starting list. So there's a lot of values, but there also like some
So I have something you might want to read if you're new. Something you might want to read if you're new to this whole class is that there's a getting started guide right here, little thing that helps you get set up. And there's 4 steps. get a web browser, which I'm sure you have. Get a text editor. Here's a good list of them. You know, this is what I recommend. And then step 3 and 4, I'd probably go ahead and do those too. But since we don't have any time, since I'm starting on new material right now, then just get as far as you can. And you know, if you can't get set up in time or you feel like you're falling behind, you know, either stop me or just watch what I'm doing. You know. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started with new stuff. Okay, this is the front-end web development class. This is week 2 of working off of our mockup and putting together the HTML and CSS corresponding to said mockup. So this is where we're at so far, and let me just make sure that I've got my mockup open so we can work off of it. So here it is. It's jeffreyw/noiseco, and you want to go to mockup.png. Actually, I'm sorry, mockupannotations.png, and take a look at what we've done. So what we're going to do. So here's where we're at. You know, if I move it down to 320 or something, looks quite similar to what we've got here, at least from these two things. And we're just going to continue on to this next section. Okay, so next section. Let me go ahead and, do I want to do that? Yeah, I want to do a little side-by-side thing. 1 second. Okay, side-by-side. Cool, that kind of works a little bit. Okay, so we're going to continue. What do we want to do? We want to start styling our hero section here. Our hero section shows up in our code right inside here. And we've got an H1 and we've got a site up now. What it's going to look like is something much prettier. It's going to be white text with a nice cloudy building background and a really nice big looking button that you can click. So we've got some work to do. I think the first thing we can do is go ahead and apply this background image to our hero section. So our background image, if you're working off class 18, oh, by the way, remember, don't make changes to class 18, which you've downloaded if you've gone ahead and cloned my repo. Instead, go ahead and please make a copy of it somewhere else. In fact, I should probably do that exact same thing. I'm going to make a copy of it so I can keep class 18 as is and make my copy as class 19. So up I go. I'm going to go ahead and do class 18, make class 19. You can get rid of anything called assignment. So I'm just going to get rid of assignment, solution. So all I've got left is these 4 files. Layout, images, folder, index, and style. And that's in class 19. So you can create a new folder of your own somewhere else called class 19. Okay, next I'm going to go ahead and navigate to it. 19, and I'm going to run harp server. And now, if I simply reload the page that I have open right over here, it'll be the exact same thing, but it's loading from the new location. That's another beneficial thing of running the server, is that I don't have to type in the entire path of the file I'm working on in the address bar. And if I move it around or change it, as long as I'm running the server that's coming to the same port, then it doesn't really matter where it is. So that's helpful. Okay, now that I've got my stuff in a new place, oh, I'm sorry, this is still the old place. Let me close this and reopen Sublime Text in class 19. Class 19. Let's just open this whole folder and go ahead and cram these two together, and there we are. Okay, let's achieve synergy, guys. Inside the images folder, we have this, what is it? Hero.jpg, this terrible image of a corporate structure with clouds above it. It's awful, but here it is. So we're going to use hero.jpg. Last week I talked about we're using JPEG instead of PNG for this image specifically because it's a photo. It's lossy, that is to say it's quite a large image, and we use JPEG compression to make it a little bit easier to download. Whereas these PNG files don't use compression because they're so small, you really don't need them to be compressed. And so they can remain pixel perfect And as an added bonus, semi-transparent, which is where that's why that checker box pattern is showing up. Cool, so let's go ahead, open up our SCSS file, scroll down to where we see the hero section, which we don't. Okay, we currently have no styling for section class hero. So I'm gonna go ahead and write some right here, above details, because that's where my details section is here. I'm gonna say that the hero section has a background of images/hero.jpg. Sorry, let me make this a little easier to read. There we go. Still a little too narrow. That's better. Okay, so images/hero.jpg. Save it, reload it, and there we go. Okay, so that's a start. Section class hero is here. So where do these white borders come from? When you see white borders between things that you didn't add yourself, you start to look at where margin might show up on the page. What elements might have margin? Okay, is it the nav? No, it's not the nav. The nav doesn't have margin. Our hero section doesn't have margin. You can find margin, of course, by looking for those orange highlights on the page. Does section class details have margin? No. So both neighboring things don't have margin, which means we have to start going inside these children until we start seeing something. Ah, there we go. I went inside section class hero, went inside the container, and I've got H1, and there's this orange margin above and below the H1. Of course, as we know, vertical margin tends to collapse outside of containers when possible, or when it, So that's what's actually creating the space. As for underneath, if we go inside section class details and look at our UL, that's some margin. Let's go even further and look at the H2. The H2 inside the LI instead of the UL, instead of the container, inside the details is what's causing margin to space out the details section from hero. So we can certainly take care of this H1 for now, but let's continue on a little bit more with our hero now that we can actually see it. The next thing that we want to do is, it looks like the wrong part of the hero background image is showing up. It's more this like weird glassy building texture, whereas in the mockup, it looks like it's a little bit more centered. See, if we take a look at the whole image here, the very center of the image is around right here, and that's pretty much what it looks like in a mockup. You got that little building poking out, whatever else. So it looks like we're using some sort of background positioning to put our background right in the center there. So the cool thing about our background property is that we can provide more than just an image or a color. We can provide a color, an image, a background positioning, background repeat property, background size property, all in one line. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do there. So if you want to provide more than one thing, you simply provide the image first, and then you provide the centering, such as 50%. 50%, that single percentage there is going to say, go ahead and make it so the very center of this box or that is to say, the image is 50% offset both vertically and horizontally. So the center of the image is in the center of the box. The image is centered. There we go. That was it. So now the center of our background image is also the center of the box. Simple enough? Okay. Next up. I think we're pretty much done with the back. Well, actually, we're not. You see how this is a little darker? The clouds and building and everything look a little darker than what we've got right here. Well, that's because I've got this little annotation right here that says 25% black overlay. We've got a little dark overlay over the background here, which will make our text a little bit more readable, especially when we turn it white. And so how do we do that? How do we set an overlay on top of our background image? In fact, how do we make something 25% opaque? Well, the answer is you kind of can't with a single div. With this hero div here, we can't say that the background inside it, or that we're going to have an overlay on top of the background, but not on top of all the other content. We actually have to have some sort of interim element, something that sits on top of our background image, but underneath all of our text, or at least surrounding all of our text, that makes it so we can kind of like paint a semi-transparent black box on top of our background. And once we take a look at the wide version of our page, we'll understand a little bit more why that's important. So this, by the way, is going to be the desktop mockup. We might get to this today, we might not. But as you can see here, there is this 25% black overlay just with the text and the Sign Up Now button, but not over the rest of the image there. In the mobile version, that black overlay just encompasses the entire thing. But if we look at this, we see that there seems to be a need for some sort of interim element to only go this far and only cover this amount of space and let the rest of this cloudy area just kind of breathe on its own. So that's what I'm going to do. Inside my hero section here, and outside of my container, and we'll see why. Well, let me explain why. You might not see it, but every single one of these sections has a container inside it. What the container is doing is it's preventing the content from stretching all the way to the very edges. See all this empty space here? Just color, 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 color. The reason there's nothing there is because each one of these sections has a container element, which you've already added in, which goes ahead and makes sure that each one of them is only yay wide and centered in horizontally centered. If we don't have that little interim thing, there's no way of saying that we want a certain amount of space on the left, a certain amount of space on the right of each one of these sections or navs or headers or footers. So that's why we have that little thing there. Now what you'll notice here is that the Chief Synergy, blah, 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 Sign Up Now, those are also kind of within those boundaries, within our 960 pixel grid. That's how wide it is. But the black overlay goes beyond that. So that means that the black overlay, given that it stretches all the way across, must be outside of this container div, but it must be inside our hero div, which has that background image, right? Because we have to have it showing on top of it. Which means we need to create a new div right here. I'm going to call it class hero overlay. Overlay is a good name for kind of some dark, kind of shaded area that sits on top of something else. It's a good overlay. I mentioned this in class before, but I use an interesting naming convention for my classes when possible called BEM, block element modifier syntax. I'm going to get into it really quickly, and I think that I pretty much decided this is going to extend to another week because there's a lot to cover, and I don't want to rush it too much. So I've got hero, then I've got hero underscore overlay. So let's just bring up something really quick about BEM. BEM. What is this? What? What is this? I don't know what this is. Why did I click on it?
BEM.
BEM. B-E-M.
But
I don't know what that site was about, but BEM. Block element modifier methodology, commonly referred to as BEM, is a popular naming convention for classes in HTML and CSS. So here's an example. This is a perfect example. We have a block on the page called button. We have an element inside the button called price. Let's say that we've got a button with like a buy now, and then it's got a little price thing on it. That price might have a little wrapper around it to make it, somehow offset from the other text around it. So button underscore price, double underscore price would be a great name for that element inside our button element. And then if you want to have specific kinds of buttons that are different in some way, you can use a modifier using dashes instead of underscores. So the dashes, anything following the dashes connotes a modifier, whereas anything following two underscores connotes an element. So you could have like button underscore price dash dash free, where maybe you have a little cross out over the price or something, right? If it's free, right? So that would be an example of one using both B, E, and M, block, element, and modifier. By the way, I disagree with these, the uses that they've got here. These modifiers having the names orange and big in them, bad idea. These are called presentational class names, and I would recommend never using them if possible. Instead of saying button orange, I would say like button highlighted or like button important, to show that this is orange for a certain reason, that it's meant to stand out or something. So I'd use more a descriptive term that says why it's orange rather than the fact that it is orange. Button big? No, I would say something like button prominent. Something that's a little bit more, something that describes a little bit more that it is on the page with this sort of purpose rather than this sort of styling. Naming, I would keep out of class names. Styling, I would keep out of class names. Styling, I'd put inside these brackets as those are where the properties go, right? Or color orange, size big, font size big, whatever, etc. Yes?
Two underscores for element and then 2 dashes for what category?
Modifier.
Modifier.
Yeah. So,
So like if someone submitted the wrong amount of money in the checkout cart, really bad example.
Sure.
Then you put like incorrect button dash incorrect.
Sure. I mean, like you could for example, have a form field that if you've submitted invalid data in that form field, you could add a class of form field dash invalid or something, right? And then you'd be able to apply whatever styling you want to that field and whatever's inside it to make things more red or whatever error color you want to use. So that's an example of using a modifier name to change something that's already on the page to make it somehow modified or different or unique.
So is there some kind of like inference that if you have the double dashes, it's like JavaScript related?
No.
Okay.
This doesn't have anything to do with JavaScript. You can certainly select any element with any name using JavaScript, that's for sure. But I really make use of this naming convention just to keep my CSS well organized. If I don't use this sort of naming convention, like I just use, for example, just price, well then I might have multiple prices on the page, and now I have to sort of differentiate my use of the class price to say, oh, price inside the button, or price inside the coupon tag, or price inside this or that. And that makes my CSS harder to read, harder to maintain. If I can use a class like this, I don't need to nest this inside anything else. I don't need to say, button space price, button this, blah, blah, blah. It just makes it a lot easier for my code to be maintained. So that's why I'm using this. I recommend using this as well. You'll see as I start to add a few things onto the page that I'll start to use this sort of syntax in some places. So in this case here, my block is the hero. This entire thing is the hero block. And this element here is my hero overlay. See? So that's why I'm using it. Okay. So hero overlay. Now, I could say this, just hero _ overlay. And I could say that the hero overlay has a background of RGBA 0, 0, 0, 0.25. So, in fact, I will do this. Hero overlay has a background of RGBA, standing for red, green, blue, alpha, of 0, 0, 0, red, green, blue, that is to say black, 0.25, a value between 0 and 1, saying pretty much what percent opacity it is. So it's got 25% opacity, alpha. That's the alpha channel for this color. So yeah, I'll do this, and we'll see how it works. It works. See how it just darkened that? Let me just go ahead and toggle it to show you the difference. This hero overlay adds a darkening effect to the entire box. That's great. Now, I could write it this way in my Sass, but with the reason that I use Sass instead of CSS is so I can do some really cool stuff like this. Reduce repetition of the word nav. So I can, instead of saying nav ul and nav a, I can say nav and then the ul inside nav and the a inside nav. This is something you can't do with CSS, but it's something you can at least write in SCSS, which will turn into something like nav ul, see right here, in my actual CSS. So here it says nav ul margin 0, but here I'm saying nav bracket ul bracket for nesting purposes, and that really helps me out. So with this, I can do something similar. Even though hero overlay does not need to be nested inside hero, because hero overlay is specific enough that I don't need to specify that it is inside the hero element, the naming is a little repetitive, right? I've got hero, and then I've got hero again with underscore overlay. So I can take a little bit of a sassy shortcut to do this. It looks very interesting. It looks like this. So don't get it twisted. I'm not saying .hero space .hero underscore overlay. I'm basically saying that this is going to turn into two separate rules, one for hero and one for hero underscore overlay. This little ampersand is known as the parent selector. Have I used it already?
No.
No. Oh yeah, I did. I used it right here. See how the parent selector works? What it does is basically take this selector, or whatever it's inside, which in this case is header, li, ampersand last child, basically means that this is going to be just tacked on at the very end of that, with no spaces or anything. So just like I showed earlier, this ul li here has a header li colon last child, a border right 0. That's this rule right here. I simply just added it right onto that. So by using the parent selector this way, I can create a new rule called .hero underscore overlay, and it'll just use this and create its own extra rule. So it ends up looking like, well, the exact same thing as it did before. Hero overlay, very straightforward. It's not .hero space .hero underscore overlay. It's just this. I just need to use the word hero once. So in other words, Sass has built-in support for BEM syntax. It's very helpful. It's really cool that I can just go ahead and do that without having to write hero over and over. So another reason to use BEM, Sass has good support for it. Is it warm for anyone inside here, or is it just me? I don't know. We had a problem with this last time around, but if anyone does feel a little warm, they can prop the window open a little bit if they feel like it. Okay, so done talking about BEM syntax for a while. Let's go back to actually styling this page. Now we've got this nice overlay here. I think we're done with styling the background. So let's go back to our mockup annotations here and take a look at the text. The text is 30 pixel font, white, with a 20 pixel black shadow. Okay. So inside the hero, we've got an H1. I don't need to give this H1 a class of hero heading. I could if I wanted to, but it really is the only H1 inside hero. So I'm just going to say H1. And I'm going to say color is white. Do I have a variable for that? No, I don't. Color is white. Font size is 30 pixels, like I said. So that makes it look like this. That's better. Let's see what else we got to do. Looks like we need to center it. So let's go ahead and just say text align is center. Great, it's centered now. What else? 20 pixel black shadow. So this needs a text shadow. There are two different kinds of shadows you can apply using CSS, and specifically these are CSS3 rules. They're a little bit more modern than other parts of CSS. There's a box shadow and a text shadow. Think of any element on the page as having two components to it. You've got the box that surrounds it, and then you've got its contents. When you apply a box shadow, you're applying a shadow to that box. When you're applying a text shadow, you're applying it to any text content inside said box. So in this case, we're going to say text shadow, and what does it say? 20 pixel. Okay, so there's a few things that you need to specify with text shadow. Two variables specify the offset, both horizontal and vertical. In this case, I didn't specify an offset. By offset, I mean like if the shadow looks like it's going off to the side or something, like if the light's shining from an angle or something. It's not in this case. The light is shining directly from above. So we set 0, 0 for offset. The text shadow can be directly underneath the text. And then we say 20 pixels for the spread. Something smells weird. And then finally, it is going to be a black text shadow. That's what we specified here, 20 pixel black text shadow. So we do this, and all of a sudden, there we go. It's a nice, actually kind of subtle effect that lets the text sort of pop out a little bit more from the background there. You know, just so it's a little easier to read. We certainly want to try to make our stuff contrast properly, because that's important for accessibility purposes and other stuff. Okay, great. So that's looking better. Another thing that you might have noticed is that this first line, achieve synergy with, this text is supposed to be bullcrap, terrible stuff that you really don't want to read in the real world. But anyway, achieve synergy with is not bold, while crowdsourced organized solutions is bold. You have to have an eye for these sorts of things. It's not bold, so we should probably say that font weight is normal. Why normal? Because by default, H1 has a font weight of bold. All headings have a font weight of bold. So we're undoing that font weight by setting it back to normal. Okay. But now, of course, crowdsourced webinar solutions needs to be strong. Or I'm sorry, it needs to be bold again. So how do we make it bold? Well, the only way we can really make it bold is by changing our HTML around. We need to separate these crowdsourced webinar solutions from the rest of the stuff. So we need to surround it in something. What do we surround it in? One thing you can surround it in would be a span. A span with some sort of class. I don't know, the class could be hero __ crowdsourced webinar solutions or something like that. But you could also just take it a lot more basic and just say, why are we making this bold? We're making it bold because we're trying to emphasize that it's crowdsourced webinar, blah, 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 right? We actually got some meaning behind bolding this text and not bolding the other text. So because we have meaning behind it, we actually have a few elements that we can depend on that, that communicate emphasis. The two elements are EM for emphasis, and strong for strong emphasis. EM and strong are pretty much used semantically interchangeably. You can use one or the other. I guess the idea is that strong is supposed to be for stronger emphasis if you're already using M to emphasize something. The good thing about strong, though, is it gives us a little added bonus of bolding the text when we surround it. This will lead you into a trap, especially beginning web developers will go, oh, you can just use the strong tag to bold stuff? Cool. Then I'm not going to have to write any CSS anymore. I'm just going to start surrounding stuff I want bold and strong. No, you don't do that. You never use specific elements to make things look a certain way. That's not what HTML is for. HTML is all about meaning. CSS is all about presentation. But it just so happens in this specific case that we want this text to be bold. We also feel that emphasizing it is important to do in HTML. And so using the strong tag kind of kills two birds with one stone. So it's going to look like this. Ta-da. We just surrounded crowdsourced webinar solutions with the strong tag. Oops, wrong button. Sorry, I'll bring that back. And voila. There we go. That text is bold, and the other text is not. I want to check to see if I have any questions online. I do have questions online. Hi. Yes, less does have the same features as CSS. The choice between the two is basically just a preferential one. Less is, again, just a very similar thing to a CSS. Stylus is also another language that's somewhat similar. The only reason I'd recommend using SCSS is because that's what everybody uses. It just has more usership, more support, more people writing about it than less. So if you're familiar with that, then yeah, it does a lot of the same stuff. In fact, harp, I think, comes with a less file. If you do a harp init command, it creates a less file for you. So the people behind harp are more have more of a preference toward less versus Sass, but it has support for both. So I use Sass just because that's kind of the thing there. All right. Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, so a while back you said CSS is just for presentational stuff. You shouldn't give your CSS class names like presentational meaning, like whatever that said at the bottom.
Yeah, right.
But I've been reading in a couple of I haven't read too deep about this thing called atomic CSS for very large projects like when you're, I don't know, something like eBay or whatever.
Right.
Where our CSS will grow too much if you try to give every div a unique class and unique styling. So sometimes it becomes this trade-off where you're probably better off writing your class names presentationally, like
Yeah.
as the block, so you make your HTML
Yeah.
more concise.
There are two trains of thought. There's atomic CSS and there's object-oriented CSS. BEM follows in the object-oriented CSS sort of train, where you refer to elements as objects or parts of objects, and you give them names like that. Whereas atomic CSS allows you to apply specific sorts of things like button, large, button, important, button this, or whatever. And you add a bunch of stuff that sort of like adds on little stylistic things to it until you get what you want. I disagree that atomic CSS, where you add a bunch of small classes to make things look the way you want, makes things much better. Because if you think about it, if you need to change something, for example, if you've got a lot of buttons across the site that are all styled the same way, and if you use atomic CSS to make it look the same way, chances are those buttons, for example, have like 5 of the same classes. And if you want to change them, you either have to go throughout your entire site and remove one of those 5 classes or add another class, or you have to go into one of those properties in your CSS file and change one of those atomic properties, which will change everything across the entire site, right? So I think that it makes it a little bit more brittle, and I disagree with the idea, the concept that you'll run out of names, or that naming is especially hard on a very, very large website. I think that if you use the BEM approach and you start thinking about parts of your site as different interchangeable modules or components, that you won't run into the situation where certain things are overlapping with other ones, because your blocks can be more than just something like hero or details. Your block can be something like, if you have a page like, you know, about, and you have a list of CEOs and then you have so-and-so, you can have like, your block can be like, about CEOs list, right? And that's still very specific, right? And then you can say, about CEOs list item, or underscore underscore item. About CEOs list underscore underscore item dash dash first, or founder, or something, right? So I think that using something like BEM and just applying a single class instead of applying many, many, many classes to get what you want makes it a little bit easier. And you can do that sort of repetition or application of different, of like different parts of like different atoms or parts of CSS like language using things like Sass, where you can apply mix-ins or variables or whatever. So that's where the atomic part comes in on your presentational side, rather than your semantic or your content side. So that's my argument for it. But different organizations do it in different ways. So anyway, cool. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It is somewhat of a debate. Cool. So there we go. We've got our nice styled H1 there. So let's move on to our sign up now button. Here comes the meat and potatoes. This is fun. What we've currently got is a simple link. Yeah, 1 second. My wife is texting me. She's saying if she's going to come here. See you at home, because it's going to take a while. So she shouldn't hang around. Okay. Yes. So sign up now button. Looks like this. We're going to make it look like this. First question is, were we right in choosing an A tag to make it all like hyperlink style when it looks more like a button? Yes, we were. Even though it looks more like a button, remember, looks mean nothing in HTML. This is still a link because in reality, the sign up now button might take us to a sign up page, right? And that's what a link does. So we're going to keep our sign up now button as a regular ahref equals something and style it as such. So let's go ahead and select the A inside our hero. If we expected to use this sign up now button in more places than just this A inside the hero, we might consider giving the sign up now button a class that can be used elsewhere, a block of its own, if you will. Excuse me, but just because I don't expect that to happen, at least for now, I'm just going to say let's select the A inside the hero and be done with it. Okay, first of all, let's look at all the stuff around it. This sign up now button has a gradient of 7782b5 to 005275. It has a 30 pixel font, white. It has a 10 pixel border radius with a 50% black border. It has 30 pixels of padding on the left and probably on the right, 10 pixels of padding on the top and on the bottom. And there's 0.5 em of padding between this and the button below it. Also, there's a 50% white-black bevel on sign up now. So all that stuff is going to be applied via CSS. That's going to be a whole lot of stuff. This A is going to be a really, really long rule. But let's just start with the basics. First of all, what's a gradient? A gradient is an image term or just graphics term, which means it is a blend from one color to another. You know, if you use a paint tool or you go ahead and fill something in, you can make it so it seamlessly blends, transitions from one color to the next. So we're saying that this gradient goes from a certain color to another color. Both of which actually we already have as variables up here. See, sky blue to navy. So that's what it's going to be. I'm sorry, 005275 is different than navy. It's actually our teal color. Never mind, I take that back. Are we using that anywhere? Oh, we are. We actually are here. So this 005275 is the color of our header. It's more of a teal than a navy. So let's go ahead and create a new variable up here called teal and make that 005275. And then anywhere that we use this color, we can replace that with our variable teal. So that goes right here. Cool. And that's good for now. That's different. Yeah, okay. Okay, so how do we create a gradient? A gradient, in this case, is another background. So we're going to set background. And this is what a gradient looks like. We start with linear gradient. And that's a function in CSS, just like URL or RGBA. So we say linear dash gradient parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we set at least three things. The first thing we need to set is a direction. In which direction does the gradient go? Does it go from top to bottom, from bottom to top, left to right, etc.? So the syntax looks like this: to bottom. So to bottom means that it goes from top to bottom. The next thing that we have to specify is the start color, which in this case is going to be sky blue. And next we have to specify the ending color, which is teal. There you go. Of course, when this turns into CSS, sky blue and teal will be replaced with the actual hex colors, but otherwise it'll look the same. So, a note about linear gradient. Linear gradient is a CSS property that took a very long time, or CSS function that took a very long time to finalize, to standardize. A lot of browsers implemented gradients in their own way. The whole to bottom syntax was changed in a lot of different ways. Some people used degrees, like an actual 360-degree value instead of to bottom. Some of them used other sorts of weird values. Some of them had to specify at which percentage sky blue starts and at which point it becomes teal. And you still can provide percentages, so you can have multiple colors, multiple stops of colors. In fact, there's a really cool tool called the Ultimate CSS Gradient Generator by Colorzilla, which goes ahead and allows you to use a very Photoshop-like thing where you can change around color stops, change around opacity stops, get really cool different sorts of effects, or create your own effects. And what happens is it generates all the CSS for you. So look at this. This is quite a lot of CSS. Look at all this. There's a regular hex background color. There's a Moz linear gradient. There's a WebKit linear gradient. Then there's a linear gradient. Then there's this really weird little thing called Filter Prog ID DX Image Transform Microsoft Gradient. Okay. So what the heck is all of this? What this tool is doing is it's generating CSS for you, but it's generating it in a way that it will have the widest browser support possible. There are certain older browsers, certain Firefox browsers, and certain WebKit-based browsers like Safari and Chrome, which don't support the latest syntax of linear gradient like this. See how instead of saying to bottom, it says top? See? So top means that it starts from the top, but now people say to bottom, since it seems a little bit more natural. So older browsers might support this, That is to say, Chrome version 10 to 2.5, or Safari version 5.1 to 6, or Firefox 3.6 to 15. Those are actually really old versions of Firefox and Chrome and Safari. The user base is very small. It's probably in the thousands of people worldwide, which is not very much. So I wouldn't really worry that much about it. I think that the majority of browsers that support this. Oh, by the way, this image transform thing is for versions of Internet Explorer 6 through 9. CSS gradients weren't supported in IE until Internet Explorer 10. So before that, they actually used a DirectX filter, which was injected into the browser. DirectX is Microsoft's imaging graphic technology, usually used for 3D games, that they somehow were able to generate some sorts of textures and patterns and whatever, and inject them into the browser in some sort of really weird, hacky way. Obviously, no other browsers other than Internet Explorer on Windows support DirectX, so that wasn't a very good idea, especially since it has the word Microsoft right there in there. So don't worry about filter. I would say don't worry about these old background things. Don't worry about, fallback isn't very important. I would say that this is all right. If you are concerned about having massive browser compatibility, you might consider using auto prefixer. And I've talked about this in previous classes. Auto prefixer takes your CSS file and goes ahead and post-processes it rather than pre-processing it. It takes a plain CSS file and adds any prefix to rules that you use that might need them. So if you are using things like linear gradient, it will prefix them and provide you with multiple properties all right next to each other automatically, so you don't have to worry about it. Very helpful, keeps the guesswork out of it. Just lets you write your CSS as if it's a nice new language and not worry about the old stuff. So consider using this. There's even a web-based auto prefixer where you can just paste your stuff in and where is that? Where is it? Auto prefixer online. There we go. Auto prefixer at github.io. Paste your CSS in there, and out comes CSS with all your vendor prefixes on the right. Pretty cool. So yeah, or you can integrate it in different ways. You can, make it more of a command line sort of thing. Okay, so anyway, enough about that. That's our linear gradient. Let's take a look at what it looks like. There we go. Sign up now has a nice little border around it. Or not, nice little background around it. Okay, next up. Let's give this thing 10 pixels of padding on the bottom and top. 20 pixels, that's 20 pixels. 20 pixels of padding on the left and the right. Pretty straightforward. It looks like this. Padding, 10px, 20px. This value means 10 pixels vertically, 20 pixels horizontally, and that's what we want. Look, it's a much bigger, nice looking button. Let's change the color of the text. Sign up now should be 30 pixel font white. So let's make it, color is going to be white, and what was it? 30 pixels. Font size is 30 pixels. Excellent, looks a lot better. Okay, let's continue on. It has a 10 pixel border radius. Of course, a border radius means that you essentially put little circles in all four corners of your box with a radius of something, which kind of cuts out the corners, makes them rounded. So border radius is 10 pixels, and now it's a nice rounded button. Okay? Next up, 50% black border. Okay, so that means that the border around this is 50% transparent or opaque, depending on whether you're a pessimist or optimist. So let's say border is 1 pixel solid RGBA 000.5. Okay? The benefit of having a semi-transparent border is that your background is clipped at the edge of the border. What I mean by that is that this background, this gradient background, actually goes underneath your border. But you usually can't tell because your border is a solid color, right? But if your border is semi-transparent, or if it's patterned in such a way that you can see stuff in between each little dash or dot or something, then you'll get this effect where you can actually, where it doesn't actually look entirely half black, it actually looks half black with the nice blue background behind it, right? So it sort of gets part of the background underneath it. So that's a nice little effect there. Okay, what else? Gradient, font, padding, border radius, black border, and then a 3% white, black bevel. Actually, is it bevel or is it embossing? One way or another, the idea behind a bevel or an emboss is pushing something out to make it look like it's kind of like got some pushed out or pushed in texture, right? Kind of think of like a plaque, right, where you've got your words that are like kind of bumped out a little bit, and that's the only way you can see them because they've got some shadow and some light on them that makes them pushed out from everything else there. That's what a bevel is. Now there's nothing in CSS that gives us a bevel built in. There's no bevel property or anything like that. There are some CSS filters which are very futuristic things I'm not going to talk about. But the way that we can fake a bevel is by applying an inset box shadow. So what do I mean by that? A box shadow means that you've got this nice shadow behind a box, right? But an inset box shadow means that the shadow is actually inside rather than outside of the box. It actually kind of makes it look like the box is punched in and you've got like a little bit of space between you and the background of the box, right? So by providing an inset shadow that is white on the top and black on the bottom, then all of a sudden, that is to say two shadows, one white, one black, both inset, it makes it look like the button is a little bit more kind of popping out, right? A little more clickable. So follow my lead. This is a box shadow. It's two box shadows. We're only going to provide one property though. So let's start with the white one. The white box shadow is going to be inset, meaning it's going to be inside. The white box shadow is not going to be directly like centered in the box. It's actually going to be offset a little bit, so we can see a little bit of it. It's going to be 1 pixel offset down and to the right. That's so we can see it on the top, see it on the left, but not see it on the bottom of the right. So it's going to be 1 pixel, which means 1 pixel down, 1 pixel to the right. And then we're just going to say white, semi-transparent white, which looks like this. So that's 50% white, 255 divided by 255.5. Why 255? Because every color has a red, green, and blue value from 0 to 255. That's what, 24-bit color, something like that. 256 is a power of 2. So 255 is that minus 1 because we start from 0 and we go to 255. So those 3 in a row means white. And then 0.5 means semi-transparent. So you'll see here at the end that I don't have a semicolon, I have a comma. I have a comma because we're going to provide a second shadow. This second shadow is going to be inset. It's going to have a -1 pixel by -1 pixel offset, which means it's going to be bumped up and to the left instead of down and to the right. And it's going to be semi-transparent black. So let me just put this on 2 lines just to make it a little easier to read. Here we go. Box shadow, inset, and then inset, so on and so on. Looks like that. And it ends up looking like this. And we're done. So again, it's really hard, kind of very subtle. But if I zoom in far enough, you'll see that there's this nice white inset shadow here. And then there's a nice black inset shadow along this border as well. So that's what I was going for. All right. So there we are. Any questions so far? Make sense? There's our cool looking button. before I depended on auto prefixer, or before browsers supported a lot of these rules like box shadow, border radius, background, linear gradient, this set of properties was probably like twice the size. It was very long, but now I don't have to worry about any of that. So excellent, great. It's only 7 properties. Okay. Obviously, sign up now seems to be kind of popping out from our hero. Why is that? It's because the sign up now button is an inline element, which means that its top and bottom padding and border and margin or whatever kind of don't have any place on the page. It's really weird how vertical measurement works with inline elements like a link. So if we don't want this link to have this sort of weird spacing thing where its top and bottom measurements kind of pop out, we can go ahead and just give this a display of block. Oops, but now it stretches all the way across the page. Well, you know what? I take that back. Never mind, not a display of block. I think I've got another way of doing this. Right, so I actually didn't specify this. Oh no. I want there to be a certain amount of spacing above and below. But currently, my section here doesn't have any padding on it. That is to say, this text is sitting at the very, very top of this section here. This sign up now button is actually popping out from below. So I didn't actually specify it here, but I'm going to make an educated guess that I want there to be 0.5 em of 30 pixels between these things, underneath them, and above them. So what's 0.5 em? Em, of course, is a measurement of a line height. When you say 1 em, you're saying the height of one line. 0.5 em, half of one line. But I said 0.5 of 30. Em measurement changes depending on what the font size is of the box that you're sizing. So if I want there to be 0.5 em of 30 pixels of padding above and below, I should probably make this entire hero section have 30 pixels of size, which actually works out great because both my H1 and my A are font size 30 pixels. So I can simplify. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of one of these, font size 30 pixels, and I'm going to move this font size 30 pixels up into the hero. Great. Now everything inside my hero is 30 pixels. And that means now that everything's 30 pixels, I can apply a padding on my hero of 0.5 em 0. Oh, actually, that's not what I want. But we'll see why it's not what I want. Whoops. Oh, got it. Okay. Sign up now looks fine. What's going on with this stuff here? This is really weird. Section class hero. You see how the section class hero has the padding on the top and the bottom? That's what we wanted. But first of all, this hero overlay doesn't seem to stretch all the way up. It's got some really weird rendering stuff going on right here. First of all, the actual overlay seems to start there when it really should start at the top. Why is it not starting at the very top? That's because we added a padding to our hero and not to our overlay, meaning that that dark background is going to be inside the padding and not cover the entire hero. So I think we want to move this padding to our overlay instead. Okay, so now the entire thing is darker. Next problem. Why is this text so big? How did it get so big? What happened to it? I thought we made it 30, right? Well, it turns out that H1, by default, has a font size of 1.5 em when it's inside a section. So that means that it is actually 45 font size instead of 30, because that's 1.5 em of 30, right? So we actually here have to set a font size of 1 em, which means just the exact height that we specified is the font size above, right? So now it's back down to 30. So that's a little iffy. Now that we have it smaller, we're not having that weird problem where the background seems to repeat itself. I'm not sure if you noticed that, but the background seems to tile at the top and the bottom because that section was too big. Fortunately, we don't really have to worry about that anymore, so I'm just going to skip it. But if we run into it again, then we'll deal with it. Okay. Okay. Next problem. this hero overlay, or this hero in general, has too much padding at the top now, and not enough padding at the bottom. That's very strange. Why is that? The reason for that is because now our H1's margin has been contained. Before we added padding to our overlay, do you remember how there was a white space between our hero section and our nav above it? That space came from our H1's margin, which we never got rid of. But now, because we've added a padding to this hero overlay, that margin is no longer overflowing. Margin stops when it hits padding. So if some sort of container element has padding, the margin is not going to be able to go past it, which is why now we have sort of a stacking of padding and then margin, which is giving us way too much space at the top here. So there's an easy solution to that. Change the margin of this H1. We can give it a margin of 0. That'll certainly solve it. And there we go. Now it's got just the actual margin that we want at the top and the bottom. But there's a little bit of a problem, which is now there's less than 0 space between the Sign Up Now button and Achieve Synergy with Crowdsource Webinar Solutions. Our mockup specifically says there should be 0.5 em or 30 pixels between these two things. So instead of saying margin 0 for the H1, I'm going to do this. Margin 0, 0, 0.5 em. So why is 0, 0, 0.5 em? Why not just 0.5 em? Well, if we said 0.5 em, then it would have that margin on all 4 sides. Top, right, bottom, left. We don't want that. By specifying 0, 0, 0.5 em, we're saying 0 on the top, 0 on the left and the right, and 0.5 on the bottom. When you provide 3 measurements, it goes top, sides, bottom. And that's exactly what we want. 0, 0, 0.5 em. Still not enough though, not enough space. It's all because of this really weird situation where the top and bottom spacing, the padding and the border of this Sign Up Now button doesn't seem to really exist anywhere. So that's really strange. I don't know of a great way of actually solving that. I forget what I did last time, but I do have something I can do. Remember how I said that display block isn't exactly what we want? Display block makes that padding show up properly, but it also stretches our button all the way across the page. We don't want that because right here the button should be in the center of the page. So we really want there to be a certain amount of margin on the left and the right, which pushes it inward, right? So we could try doing margin 0 auto, see how that works. Nope, no dice. Because our block element stretches all the way across, there's nothing, we can provide as much automatic margin on the left and the right as we want, but it's not going to solve the problem. So how do we make it so this element can be an element that has vertical and horizontal space in it? You know, because we need to do that because otherwise if we set it to inline, that whole sort of weird overlap thing would happen. But how do we also make it so it doesn't stretch all the way across the page? Well, we could do inline block. Inline block is actually kind of what we want. It makes it so that it still has the properties of a block element where we can provide padding, border, and margin on all 4 sides, and it'll work fine. It'll work the way we want. But it also won't actually act like a block element in that it takes up its own line. Inline block elements can still sit inline right next to each other, but they can still be measured, giving height, width, padding, border, margin, all over the place, however we want it to. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Next problem is, of course, this margin 0 auto isn't actually working. Margin 0 auto only works for block elements. It doesn't work for inline elements because automatic margin doesn't really make much sense when you have inline elements that are in line with other things on the page. What does that automatic margin to the left and the right of it mean, even, when you have something sitting on its left and sitting on its right? It doesn't really make any sense. So margin 0 auto won't work. So how do we get this thing in the center? It's quite simple. We just align everything inside the hero to the center. Because it's an inline element, it adheres to text align center. See what I mean? Like, because it's just an inline element that sits along with other sorts of text or other sorts of other inline elements, centering it will work just fine. So we can't give this thing itself a text align of center. That's not going to work. giving the A itself a text align at center isn't going to do much because that only aligns stuff to the center inside this bluish region that we have inside the green, which of course doesn't work because if the text is as wide as the container, centering it or moving it to the right or the left doesn't really mean anything, right? It's not moving it anywhere. So we can't add it there. Instead, we need to add it either in the overlay or the hero. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to align the entire hero, which has the added effect of me being able to get rid of text align center in the H1. It's just going to make everything in the hero, both font size 30 and text align center. And there we go. And we're done with our hero. That took an hour. Any questions? Any thoughts about why we're doing certain things? How it all works?
The CSS tips page,
CSS tricks.
is that a good page to look at?
Yes. CSS Tricks is a really great site. I think it's made by Chris Coyer, am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris Coyer is a very talented guy. He's made CSS Tricks. He's also made a site called cont'd, which is pretty much a live editing place where you can, in your browser, edit HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and see it just show up immediately. It's really cool. Yeah, CSS Tricks is a very neat site. There you go. Wait, I gotta press a little thing. There we go. Cool, anyway. Yeah, everything that you read here, for the most part, is pretty well reasoned. Has a lot of really great snippets so you can learn how to do certain things in neat, CSS, whatever. So just go through the list. It's good stuff. Some of the stuff's a little bit old. I wouldn't say that any of it is out of date and you shouldn't use it necessarily, but you should check the dates on some of these things. They might be 5 or more years old. So you might consider whether certain things are done in a more modern way nowadays. Either way, it's a great site, and I do suggest using it. Yeah, cool. So we're done with our hero. Let's continue on to our details section. Fortunately, there's a little less work to do on our details section. Looks like things need to be centered, and it looks like there needs to be a little icon above each one of these things. Do these icons, do you think that they qualify as image tags on our page? Do they need to be here? Is there anything on the page that says, now here's a picture of 2 speech balloons. Here's a picture of a phone. Here's a picture of, this isn't even a cloud, it's just a sign thing. Is that at all relevant to the page? Does anyone need to see a picture of a sign? No, right? It's a decoration, which means it's CSS. We're going to use CSS to apply these images onto the page. So barely any need to change our HTML. I say barely because we need to differentiate these 3 so different images show up. But yeah, let's start from the top here. From the very top, we say 40 pixels of padding on the top and 40 pixels of padding on the bottom. Okay, so that means the details needs to have a padding of 40 pixels, 0. Okay? Next up, we have this little indicator here that says that everything inside the details section should be 75% the width of the body. So as you can see, there's a certain extra amount of space over here and there. It doesn't stretch all the way across. Okay, so fortunately, inside our details section, we already have, inside our container, which we don't want to change the width of that, but inside our container, we already have a UL element. Does this UL element serve as a good container around all of our list items? Yes, it literally is the container for the list items. And we should be able to style it however we want. I'm going to go ahead and say that this UL is going to have a width of 75%. So details, UL, width, 75%. Check it out. It's now got a width of 75%. There's a bunch of automatic margin on the right here. How do we give it a margin on both sides? Anyone remember? Margin 0 auto. That's exactly it. Cool. Right? That allows us to have 0 margin on the top and the bottom, which actually is good because the UL automatically has margin on the top and the bottom by default. We're getting rid of that, and we're applying automatic margin on the left and the right, which pushes it into the center. See that? Much better. By the way, you might notice that now the space between the hero and the details section has disappeared. There is no more white space. Why is that? Because the section class details has this padding. And remember that margin does not overflow outside of padding. But as you can see here, there's too much space between the words Agile Workforce and the padding section there. Where's that coming from? Not coming from the container, not coming from the UL, not coming from the LI. It's coming from the H2 inside Agile Workforce. Okay, see that? So let's go back to here. It looks like there should be 0.25 of heading size between Agile Workforce and the padding. And there should be 12 pixels of space above it, and then a certain amount for whatever this is. Okay, so we need to make room for these images. We also need an additional 12 pixels of space between this and the text. So I would say the best way to do that is to measure the height of these images here and simply calculate that and add on 12 pixels, and that will be the top margin of every heading. Actually, sorry, it won't be the top margin of every heading, but that's a good start anyway. So how tall is each one of these things? Let's go over to our images folder and take a look. If you're using Mac OS, you can go ahead and open the info or do a Command I on one of these guys. And it says right here that the dimensions is 48 by 48. How about for this icon? It's also 48 by 48. This one, 48 by 48. How about that? Okay? So looks to me like we're going to want 48 pixels plus 12. That's 60 pixels, right? So 60 pixels of space above each one of these things. So why space? I mean, don't we want to like put in these things? So why are we providing blank space? Well, think of it this way. Back with this hero section, we provided this nice big cloudy background, right? How do we get images to appear on the page without actually being inside our HTML? Well, we did it with this by using a background image. Can't we do it with this instead? Can't we provide a background image for this? Let's try it out. Let's make it so every list item has a background of, sorry, images/agile.png. Let's see what happens. And, oh no. Okay, so what happened there? You loaded up the image, but it seems to have tiled it. That's what happens by default with background images. They tile. If you just provide a background URL, just an image, that's what happens. So let's go ahead and make it so it doesn't repeat. Literally, we just type in here, no repeat. That's it, no dash repeat. And bam. A little bit better, right? But it's still behind the text, even though it's only showing up once. So how do we push it up a little bit more? How do we make it so it goes above the text, Agile Workforce Mobile Ready, take a chip? I mean, how do we move it out of the container? Well, we don't really want to move it out of the container because background images, by default, they sort of define the boundaries of the container, right? So you can't move it out and expect it to show up. What you can do, though, is apply padding. Think of this. Remember that this hero section here, this hero section has, or I'm sorry, the overlay section has padding on the top and the bottom. But as you can see, that black overlay extends into the padding area. which means that if you apply padding to a certain element on the page, that background image will be able to move around in that padding area. Even if it isn't tiled, you can just place it wherever you want, and it'll start at the very top of the padding. So let's give every list item a padding top of 60 and see what happens. 60 pixels. Look at that. Because the list item has this empty space above it, the background image starts in the very upper left corner of the box area, which includes the padding, which is why it looks now like our background image is actually no longer an actual background, right? It's more of a side image. So that's great. That is much closer to what we want. Of course, we want it centered, right? According to this, it should be centered. So in between no repeat and the URL, we can specify a position, just like we did with our cloud background, right? For hero, we said 50%. For here, I'm going to say top center. Is that going to work? Yeah, there we go. If you say top center, I'm not sure if it should be center top. I think top center works. Top center is going to say move it to the top and then horizontally center it. There you go. You could also say something I think like 50% 0. Will that work? Yeah, same thing. So you could use numbers if you want. 50% to be in the center, and then 0 meaning top. But either one will work. You can also say center top, top center. I was never really clear on the order of those two properties, which one's horizontal, which one's vertical. I think it depends context-wise on the words or the keywords or the measurements that you use. But yeah, there you go. 50% means it's in the center. 0 means it's at the very top. But we've still got that H2 problem, where there's now too much space between our little agile workforce thing and the H2 underneath it, right? So let's go ahead and get rid of all top margin entirely and add 0.25 em of margin in between the heading and the paragraph. So it looks like this. H2, margin 0, 0, 0.25 em. Remember that 3 thing? 0, 0, 0 on the top, 0 on the sides, 0.25 em on the bottom. There we go. It's moved up, starts right there, and has just enough space underneath it. Only problem now is that this paragraph also has margin, right? So looks like there's 30 pixels underneath each one of these, and there's no margin, or at least 0.25 margin, but that's probably coming from the heading, right? So let's make it so each one of the paragraphs has 30 pixels of margin underneath it. We could do that, or we could also just provide give it an entire margin of 0 and add that margin to the list item instead. That actually might make a little bit more sense if you think about it, because what if one of those list items had 2 paragraphs? Or what if it didn't have a paragraph? We'd still probably want that spacing, right? So that's what you should keep in mind when you consider where spacing should go in CSS. Just ask yourself, is it really spacing coming from an element inside the container, or is it the container itself that's spacing things out? So I'm going to go ahead and say that the list item itself is what has margin on the bottom of 30 pixels, and that the paragraphs inside the details section don't have any margin at all. So I added this one, margin bottom 30, and I added this one, margin 0. Okay. Much better. Every list item now has padding on the top, margin on the bottom. Next problem is that this list item has margin on the bottom. But there should only be 40 pixels total. But we already applied 40 pixels of padding to our details section. See? Too much space. So how do we get rid of that? Any thoughts? Last child. That is the answer. We select the last LI and get rid of the margin bottom. It looks like this. There you go. We don't have to say margin bottom. Margin 0 is adequate. There we go. Exactly 40 pixels of padding down at the bottom. See how that P matches up just with the padding there. That's excellent. The very little descender there. Okay. And I think that is it. Oh, I'm sorry. We forgot to style the text and center it. So let's center everything in the details section. Let's say text align center. And then finally, it looks like it should be 16 pixel font with this navy color. So what size is it currently? If we scroll down this list and keep going, we'll see that there is no specific property here that says what the font size is. That's weird. The default font size, period, the default font size is 16 pixels. If you don't see a font size at all, it's 16. You can prove it by going over to your computed section. If you see a little computed tab, you'll be able to scroll down inside this computed thing until you scroll all the way down to font size. Oh wow, it's too narrow for me to even show it to you. There we go. Font size 16 pixels. Not set anywhere in particular, but that's what it is. Any rule that looks more not faded out, you'll be able to click this little button to actually go to the part in your CSS file where it says what the font family is. But if it's grayed out like this, then it's just automatic. It's just coming from the way that your browser renders text. So by default, that's 16 pixels. So that's good. That's what it says in the design. Okay, so 16 pixels is taken care of. I think 24 pixels is taken care of as well. Let's see here. Font size is 24 pixels. Now, we didn't set a font size of 24 pixels, but it turns out that according to the user agent style sheet, this H2 has a font size of 1.5M, which of course is 1.5 times 16. So that's 24. Okay, great. So we got that figured out. So the font sizes are great. We just need to change the color of both of those things. So we can just go ahead and say that everything inside the details has a color of navy. And there we go. Very subtle, but now it's a navy blue color. Yes?
Did you tend to match the images to?
That's the one thing we're missing. Yes, of course. I completely missed out. Yes, let's do that. So each one of them has this speech balloon thing, right? But only one of them is supposed to. It's this first Agile workforce thing. So how do we change these? How do we differentiate them? Thoughts about how we can differentiate these different LIs?
Class names.
Class names, exactly. Let's give them each a different class name, and that'll do it. I'm going to give this list item a class of details agile. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Details item agile. See, that's BEM right there. This is block element modifier. It's an item inside details, and the modification is that it's the agile item. See what I mean? So that's how you use BEM. I could also add a class here of details item. I could add both of them in case I wanted to style every details item a certain way. In fact, I might want to do that. Yeah, well, I'll talk about that in a second. So I'll add a class of details item mobile, and then details item cloud. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go over here. So right now we've got LI has a background of URL images agile.png. We probably want to move that. where do we move it? Well, we've got details, and then we've got item. But we already have a selector for li, right? So we can't say li agile, right? Because that's actually not going to work at all. This CSS is going to become, it's going to look like this. It's going to look really weird. It's going to look like details li agile. See how that's completely broken and doesn't work? This is going to select an element called li-agile inside details. There's no such thing as an li-agile in HTML. It doesn't exist. So don't try it, right? So we have to do something like this. Item agile. And that's great. This actually is what we want. The only problem is that we already have all this styling for LIs up here. So wouldn't it make more sense to just move all this styling inside here and completely get rid of the LI styling? Wouldn't that work better? You know, so we don't like select every item, like select the styling that applies to every item in one place and then apply all the additional styling inside here. We just had it as kind of the parent selection stuff, and then each child modified element is somehow different. Wouldn't that be better? The only problem, though, is it's not going to work. All that styling goes away. Why is that? Any thoughts about why that doesn't work? The reason it doesn't work is because there is no class on the page called details item. There's only things on the page called details item agile, details item mobile, details item cloud. So that means we have to go back over here and give each one of these each 2 classes. The first class is details item, and the second class is details item agile, or details item mobile, or details item cloud. Now this sounds really verbose and wordy and everything, but trust me, it saves you a lot of time. And if you really care about the width of a selector, which you really shouldn't, because gzipping of downloaded HTML files actually compresses it all, so any repetition really doesn't cause any additional download speed problems. But if you do care about it, there are ways to like compress your CSS classes when all is said and done in production using CSS modules or some other sort of thing that goes ahead and gets all the English out of them and turns them into more programmatic class names. But really, you just don't need to worry about it. But as you can see here, you now understand why I've got a class of details item for each of them, and then details item agile or mobile or cloud for each individual one. Because now I can style all these to be the same, and style all these to be the same, but write my SCSS so it looks like it's in more of a nesting pattern, rather than having LI, and then also having item, and then agile, and cloud, and whatever. So back to here. This worked. This is back the way I want it. Now I can say agile has a background image of URL images agile.png. Oops, wrong button. Mobile has mobile.png, and cloud has cloud.png. Something worth noting, you notice that I got rid of the URL inside this background property. A background property is one of many compound properties in CSS where you can provide the image, the positioning, the repetition, all in one line. But if you provide a background, and then you provide a background image, it's only going to override the background image, and it's going to keep the positioning and the repetition as is. So that's great. It kind of just sits on top of the existing property. So each one of these is going to be 50% 0, no repeat, and then a separate background image for each case. Back over here, ta-da! Agile, mobile, sign. I couldn't find a good cloud picture that matches with the style of these two guys. This is a few years ago. Any questions about what I just did? Why it makes sense, why it doesn't? Yeah, what's up? In the back?
What's the point in chaining detail, item, and those other 3 specifics? How come you don't just like give them class names inside?
Oh, like details, then details item, and then details item agile.
Like I believe you should be able to inside dot details,
Uh-huh.
be able to just dot item.
Oh, I could, but you might not. Were you here from my talk about BEM? Yeah. So I was talking about the BEM naming system, where not having to worry about nesting and just using like fake nesting using Sass results in rules like. You see how this selector is extremely simple? It doesn't have any spaces in it. It doesn't have any like brackets or anything in it saying like agile inside item, inside details, inside this, inside this, inside this. It's a single selector for a single item on the page that doesn't have any sort of nesting structure. That makes it really, really simple, really fast, straightforward, and easy to know exactly what you're talking about. So if you take on the role of writing out a more descriptive class name, you don't have to worry about that sort of nesting problem, and it saves you a lot of time and a lot of confusion down the line. Yeah, so it's a good way of avoiding nesting, which is one of the less good parts of CSS. Cool. All right. So there we are. I think we're done with that now. Great. I think we have enough time to work on our footer. And I'll probably call that a day, and I will continue on to part 3 next week. In case you're wondering, I will have a lab on Thursday this week, and I think I will have a lab next week. Let me double check that, because I am going out of town. You know what? No, okay, I will have a lab this week. I won't have a lab next week, just FYI. But that's okay. Monday I will be here. Yes. I think. Sorry, let's just double check a second time. Yes. Okay. Next week is a go. Okay, let's work on our footer. Not much to say about the footer. We have to have that same image replacement thing that we're doing there. It's hard to tell, but this logo is smaller than this logo. It's a different image. This is logo.png. This is logo small.png. And it's worth noting that we've got logo and logo small. Slight difference, but it's different. Fortunately, we don't have to, okay, so up here inside our header H1, we applied a background, height, margin, overflow, text indent, white space, width. These can work on both of them. So instead of cutting and or copying and pasting these 3 properties onto footer H2, which is what this is, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to create something called a placeholder rule. And I'm going to call the placeholder image replace. Image replace starts with a percentage sign. This is not part of CSS. It's part of Sass. This percentage sign allows me to cut these 3 things, move them up here, and then back down in my header, I can say extend image replace. So again, it's at extend percentage image dash replace, and this is what image replace looks like. I went ahead and cut those 3 properties, overflow, text indent, and white space, and put them up here. So this is one of 2 ways in Sass that you can take a set of properties and apply them in multiple places in your page. Extending is very interesting. What it does is I remember I called this a placeholder selector. This placeholder selector gets replaced with any of the selectors that extend this set of properties. So we'll see what that means when we get a little further. But go ahead and just, instead of having those text replace things in there, go ahead and extend image replace. And then down at the bottom, we're going to say footer, and inside footer, we're going to say H2, extend image replace. So as you can see, noise code disappears, and it's gone from here as well as it was. So we can no longer see the text noise code inside this H2. It was hard to see earlier because it was black on navy, but still, it's gone. Now look at this rule here. Header H1, comma, footer H2. We didn't write this selector. There's nowhere in our SAS file that we wrote header H1, comma, footer H2. There's no comma whatsoever. So how did that get made? What happened was, in our CSS file, oops, sorry. In our CSS file, which is accessible from our sources panel here, top, hello, where is it? It's not in there, that's something else. Never mind. What I'm trying to get at is that the resulting CSS file, does it look like this? Is it style.css? There we go. Ooh, that's hard to read. Where is it? Where is it? Here it is. Really hard to see, really hard to read. But basically, this image replace rule, its selector has been replaced with header H1, comma, footer H2. It basically took the selectors, header H1 and footer H2, and just basically prepended them to that rule. That's what a placeholder does or a placeholder extend combination does in SAS. There's another more straightforward one called a mix-in. You can create a mix-in and include it in multiple places. And instead of moving the selectors up to the top, it'll simply put those properties in multiple places. But I find that to be a little repetitious. So I like the idea of simply moving the selectors or copying the selectors to the place where the single properties are and just having them all show up there. When it all comes down to it, because of gzip compression, both are fine. You know, both of them are going to result in kind of a similar file size in terms of download size. But this does sort of make it so you only see these properties only one place in the entire CSS file. So that's kind of neat. Okay, anyway, back to this. We've image replaced the H1. And now we want to give it the proper background color, or background. Background, URL, images / logo, is it underscore? Small.png. Yeah. Looks like we need to no repeat it. Actually, no, I'm sorry, we don't need to no repeat it because we're going to give it a certain width and height, which makes it so the repetition simply doesn't show up. So the height is going to be, let's find out, 137 by 40. So the height is going to be 40, and the width is going to be 137. There we go. Now it shows up. It's sitting over there. How do we get it to center? Easy. You just say margin 0 auto. And now it's in the center. Great. Okay. What's up next? Looks like there's 0.5 em of padding on the top and bottom of our footer. So let's go ahead and apply that. Pretty straightforward. Right? Pretty straightforward. 0.5 em on the top and the bottom, 0 on the left and the right. This. Now, I think I talked about this in the last class, but I'm using, oh, I'm sorry, it's in the layout file, not index.ejs. Remember, because it's part of the layout for every page on the site. Did I use the small element? Why did I use the small element? Because small has been redefined to not make text smaller, but to be used for small print, fine print, legal print, copyrights. Kind of weird, but that's the actual definition if you look it up in the spec. So we use small for copyright. So we're going to go ahead and say that the small is going to be 7782b5. So color is what? Teal? I think that's teal. Am I right about that? No, I'm wrong. Sky blue. Sorry. everything inside here is supposed to be 14 pixel font. Right now, I think this text is 16 pixel font. So, but this is probably correct. I'm not sure. Hard to tell. Font size. Oh, that's great. The font size is smaller. Not a value, but the word smaller, which means something. Oh, I guess it's 13.33333px repeating. Not exactly what we want. So we want this text to be a little bit smaller to 14. We want this text to be a little bit larger than quote unquote smaller. So I'm just going to say that well, it's going to look like this. It's going to be kind of weird. Can someone tell me what this means? What does at mean? Sorry, and mean. Ampersand. Parent. But SAS parent specifically. So wherever you see this, just look up to whatever's nesting it and that's what it is. So it's basically going to be footer and then footer small. So the footer itself and the footer small. Why do we have to specify both? Why can't we just say font size 14px? The reason is that if we set a font size of 14px on the footer, the small is still inside the footer, and so that means that the small will be smaller than the footer's font size text. So if we set it to both the footer itself and small, that means any text and the small itself will be the correct font size. So bam, now it's all the same size. Remember, if I got rid of this, look, it's even tinier than it was before because now it's 14, then smaller than 14. So set it to both of these. Now we have a rule that says footer, comma, footer small, font size 14 pixels. See? Okay. Next up, we need to center the copyright. Remember, so small is an inline element, as you can tell, because it doesn't stretch all the way across the page. So that means that we can't apply text-align center to the small itself because it's not going to center it within this box. So we need to set a text-align center on the footer instead, which will move the small into the center. The final thing we need to do, and then we're done for today, is reduce the amount of padding in between each one of these sections here. The reason that these items are so tall right now is because we already applied styling for the nav. We already said that every LI inside the nav has a line height of 36. Remember we talked about this earlier? We're using the exact same markup for this nav as we are on the nav on the top of the page. So that's why they're both styled to look the same. If we want to change the footer nav specifically, we need to be explicit and say footer nav something. Or specifically, we can just say instead of nav, we can say li, because it's the li elements inside the ul, inside the nav, inside the footer that we're caring about, right? We don't have to say footer, nav, ul, li. That's unnecessary because it's okay to just be not as unspecific as possible. Just say the li inside the footer, right? Because those are the only ones that are there. So I'm going to say that the line height is going to be, I think normal works. Oh no, that didn't work. Never mind. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the A's inside there that have a line height of normal. There we go. Thank you. And now we have to think about the padding between each one of these items here. 0.5n, 0.5n, 0.5n. I'm going to say that every A is going to have not margin, but in this case padding of 0.5m. Why not 0.5m on the top and the bottom? Actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. Let's do that. No, this is fine. Why 0.5m only on the bottom, and why padding instead of margin? Well, because we want to make the clickable areas as big as possible. And when you add padding to a link, that padding area becomes clickable. So now, instead of just the about thing, if you click slightly underneath about, then it's clickable as well. We could do something kind of silly, like saying that there's 0.25 above and 0.25 below, so it's an equal amount above and below. If you really want to do that, that's fine, but I'm just trying to finish up real fast. And then finally, the last thing is the spacing between the H2 and the nav. You see how there's no spacing? So that's pretty straightforward. We just give the H2 a margin bottom of 0.5 m. And there you go. I think that is 0.5 m of the margin, 0.5 m of the heading. So that might be too much. Maybe we want to add 0.5 m of top margin to the nav instead. Actually, yeah, let's do that just to be perfect. So nav margin top 0.5 m, and it's going to be a little less space, just a little less, and now we're done. So just to recap, the footer's got padding on the top and the bottom like that. The noise co just has margin on the left and the right. Nav has margin on the top, and then each LI inside the UL, inside the nav, I'm sorry, every A inside the LI, inside the UL, inside the nav, to the footer, has a little bit of padding on the bottom. And then finally, there's just a small sitting there at the bottom on its own. Cool, we're done. Very glad I didn't try to shoehorn in responsive stuff. We'll talk about that next week. Since that probably won't take the entire class, it really doesn't take too long to do, surprisingly enough. We're probably also going to learn about how to make a really cool interactive drop-down nav with just CSS. That's going to be pretty cool. So that's probably going to be next week's class. So yay, more of this next week. Yes, what's up?
From the point of view, the whole project, it's normal to be able, in any project, to write your text or HTML out first. And then go back and apply CSS to make it look like the artwork.
Yes.
And then go back and apply whatever reactive stuff, whether it's JavaScript.
Yeah. Yes, I would say that's a really good way of doing it. I mean, obviously, you know, like a lot of the JavaScript framework stuff you're going to add on there is going to be loading data from the database. So you might want to do that prior to writing your CSS. Well, I mean, not prior, but in parallel. Your styling of CSS shouldn't really affect your population of stuff in the HTML. You know, so I mean, what I'm saying is you might want to do CSS last once you've used your JavaScript to actually populate stuff on the page with all your reactive or otherwise, you know, MVC stuff that makes the HTML show up as it does, and then go ahead and style it. Or you just get two developers, one working on the CSS, one working on the one working on the JavaScript. I don't know. I mean, at that point, the order really doesn't matter. But I would work on the HTML of the layout of the page first, and then if you need to write the JavaScript that goes ahead and like generates extra items on the page, then go ahead and do that. Write CSS before or after, during, doesn't really matter at that point. But I would say, especially for the layout of a more marketing-based static website like this, HTML first, then CSS. So yeah, and of course, there are so many different edge cases and other situations, and we can talk about that another time. But that is, you know, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. Okay, so we're done. I will be sending out an assignment. I think last week it was like a fun with divs sort of thing, where about like using a single HTML file to lay out a bunch of boxes in different places. This week's assignment is going to be more about background images and positioning background images in different ways, using that image replacement hack that I just talked about, all that stuff. So that'll be this week's assignment. I'll be here on Thursday from 7 p.m. until 9 p.m. in the classroom right behind this one. And we'll be able to talk it through. And otherwise, sign up for the mailing list. If you haven't, donate to NoiseBridge, which I'm sure you're doing. All that stuff. I'm saying all that stuff a whole lot for some reason. Go ahead and do it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for staying a little late. Well, it's not late. I usually say it goes until 10, right? So whatever. All good. See you guys on Thursday and then Monday. Goodbye.